The Hell's Angel threw himself in front of the attack, unaware. She was his estranged daughter. The morning came in soft and slow over Millfield. Golden light pressed through the diner windows and spread across the checkerboard floor in long, warm strips. The smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon drifted through every corner of the place. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, stirring the warm air just enough to feel like a gentle breath. Patty's Diner had stood on the corner of Elm and Route 9 for 32 years. The red vinyl booths were cracked in places and patched with tape. The counter stools wobbled if you sat on them wrong. The menu hadn't changed much since the 90s, but none of that mattered to the people of Millfield. This place was theirs. It felt like home. Rosie Calloway pushed through the back door at 5 minutes to 7, still pulling her dark hair into a ponytail. She was 22 years old, small in frame, but quick on her feet. Her uniform was a pale blue dress, with a white apron tied at the waist. She wore worn sneakers that had seen too many double shifts. There were faint shadows under her brown eyes, the kind that come from working too hard and sleeping too little. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. You're late, said Carl, from behind the grill. I'm early, Rosie said, tying the apron strings in a firm bow. Your clock is fast, Carl snorted. He was a big man with a gray mustache and flour on his forearm. He had worked the grill at Patty's for nearly 20 years. He pointed his spatula at her without turning around. Tables 2, 4, and 7 need setting. I know, Carl. She grabbed a stack of paper placemats and got to work. The diner filled up the way it always did on a Tuesday morning. Slow at first, then steady. Earl Hutchins came in and took his usual stool at the counter, ordered black coffee and wheat toast, and opened his newspaper without saying much. The Delgado family settled into booth 4, the two little kids already arguing over the crayons the diner kept in a cup near the register. A pair of truckers took the big table by the window and ordered everything on the breakfast side of the menu. Rosie moved between the tables with practiced ease. She refilled coffee cups before they were empty. She remembered who took cream and who didn't. She smiled when people looked tired. She laughed at Earl's dry jokes, even though she had heard them all before. This was her rhythm. This small, warm, ordinary place was the closest thing she had to a world that made sense. She didn't talk much about her life outside these walls. She had aged out of the foster system 4 years ago, with a duffel bag, a bus ticket, and no one waiting at the other end. Millfield had been a coincidence. Patty's had been a help-wanted sign in the window, but somewhere in the years between then and now, it had become something more than just a job. It had become the only place that felt like hers. The bell above the door chimed just after 11. He came in the way a storm comes in. Not loud, just heavy. He was big, broad across the shoulders, with a thick, gray-streaked beard and arms covered in tattoos that crawled up past his collar. He wore a black leather vest layered with patches, the kind that told a story without saying a word. His boots were worn down at the heel. His face was hard, the way a face gets when it has been through too much for too long. He looked to be around 45, maybe older in the eyes. He took the corner booth, the one near the back wall. He didn't open a menu. He just sat with his large hands flat on the table, watching the room the way a man watches something he doesn't fully trust. Rosie grabbed her notepad and walked over. She was 3 steps away from his table when the world came apart. The blast hit without warning. A violent crack split the air. The walls shook. Wood splintered somewhere close. A hot rush of force swept through the diner like a wave. Rosie screamed and stumbled, and then 2 strong arms wrapped around her, and she was pulled hard against the booth wall. A heavy body came down over hers, like a roof caving in to shield her from the storm. Stay down." His voice was rough and urgent, almost breaking at the edges. "Do not move. Stay down." Dust rolled through the diner like a thick fog. It swallowed everything: the light, the shapes, the familiar corners of the place that had felt so warm just moments before. The checkerboard floor disappeared under a layer of white powder and broken pieces of wood. A ceiling tile had come down near the counter. The big window by the trucker's table was gone. Just a jagged frame with nothing left inside it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the screaming started. One of the Delgado kids cried out first, a high, sharp sound that cut right through the ringing in Rosie's ears. Then came the shuffling boots, and the scraping chairs, and the low groaning of people trying to find their footing in the confusion. Earl Hutchins had fallen from his stool. He was on his hands and knees near the counter, coughing hard into his elbow. One of the truckers had already made it to the broken window and was calling out to someone in the parking lot. "Get out! Everybody out now!" Carl's voice boomed from somewhere behind the grill. His tone was the kind of steady that only comes from a man who has trained himself not to panic. "Move toward the front! Go!" People moved. They bumped into each other. They grabbed children and purses and nothing else. Boots crunched over broken things. The bell above the front door chimed again and again as people pushed through it. Rosie tried to push herself up. The biker's arm stayed firm across her back. "I said stay down." He wasn't yelling. His voice was low and controlled, but there was a force behind it that made her go still without really deciding to. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice came out thin and shaky. "I think I'm okay." "Don't move yet." He shifted his weight slowly, his broad shoulder rising just enough to look around the booth, without exposing either of them. His eyes moved fast across the room, scanning, reading, the way a man does when he has spent years watching for things that other people never see coming. Rosie pressed her palm flat against the cracked vinyl seat and felt bits of debris under her fingers. Her ears were still ringing. There was a thin line of warmth running down her forearm where something had caught her on the way down. But it didn't feel serious. She blinked through the dust and tried to slow her breathing. "Is it over?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Sir." She turned her head slightly. This close, she could see the deep lines carved into his face, the gray threading through his beard, the way his jaw was set tight like a locked door. "Is it over?" "I don't know yet," he said quietly. The dust was beginning to settle. Thin shafts of midday light cut back through the haze, landing on the wreckage in pale strips. An overturned coffee cup sat on the edge of a nearby table, still dripping. A child's crayon had rolled to a stop near the baseboard. A paper placemat fluttered down from somewhere above like a slow leaf. The diner was almost empty now. Just the two of them still in the corner booth. And Carl, who Rosie could hear near the back, checking on the kitchen with quick, heavy footsteps. She tried again to sit up. The biker put a hand on her shoulder. Gentle this time, but certain. "Not yet," he said. "Everyone else is leaving," she said. "I know. You should go too." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Something complicated and fast, like a thought he almost said out loud, but swallowed back down. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And he meant it. Every word of it was solid and sure, sitting in the air between them like something that had already been decided long before this moment. In the distance, sirens rose, first one, then two, growing louder as they wound through the quiet streets of Millfield, toward the corner of Elm and Route 9. He stayed exactly where he was. The front door burst open. Two paramedics came through fast, one right behind the other, heads low, eyes already sweeping the room. The first one was a young woman with a red ponytail pulled tight under her cap. The second was a broad man with a calm face who moved like he had done this 100 times before. "Fire and rescue! Anyone still inside, call out!" Carl appeared from the back hallway, waving one arm. "Here, two in the corner booth, and I got a cut on my hand, but I'm fine. Go to them first." The red-haired paramedic crossed the floor in long strides, stepping over a fallen chair and a broken section of baseboard trim. She crouched beside the booth and looked at them both. "Is either of you hurt?" The biker sat back slowly, finally giving Rosie room to breathe. He rolled his left shoulder once, checking it, then set both hands flat on the table. "She might have caught something on her arm," he said. "Check her first." The paramedic turned to Rosie. "Can you sit up for me?" Rosie pushed herself upright. The booth seat crackled under her. Her head swam for just a second. A brief, dizzy tilt, and then it passed. She pressed the back of her hand to her forehead and took a slow breath. "I'm okay," she said. "I just got knocked around a little." "Let me be the judge of that." The paramedic's voice was kind but firm. She took Rosie's arm gently and turned it to the light. A thin scrape ran from the inside of Rosie's elbow almost to her wrist, red and raw, but not deep. "Superficial. We'll clean that up." She glanced over her shoulder at her partner. "Bring the kid over here." Outside, more vehicles were pulling in. Through the broken window frame, Rosie could see flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the diner's old brick wall. A fire truck had parked across the street. 2 police cruisers sat at angles near the entrance. Another paramedic van was just rolling to a stop. Voices filled the parking lot. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk across the street, hugging each other, pointing at the building with their hands over their mouths. Someone was crying. A little girl in a yellow jacket sat on the curb with a man who was probably her grandfather, both of them wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. Rosie watched all of it through the empty window frame. Her diner, her town, her ordinary Tuesday morning, split open like something broken that could not be put back exactly the way it was. The paramedic cleaned the scrape with a careful hand. Rosie barely felt it. She was still watching the street. "You did good staying down," the paramedic said. "Whoever kept you from moving probably kept you from getting hit worse." Rosie glanced sideways at the biker. He was sitting back against the booth now, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching the room the way he had before. Still alert, still reading everything. "He wouldn't let me move," Rosie said quietly. "Smart man." The biker said nothing. He just gave a single slow nod and kept his eyes on the door. The paramedic wrapped a clean bandage around Rosie's forearm and secured it with 2 strips of tape. "We're going to need you both outside, so we can do a full check. Head trauma can hide for a while after a blast like this." "Sure," Rosie said. She reached up to straighten her collar, and her fingers caught on something. The silver locket had come loose from inside her uniform top. It dangled now against the front of her shirt, swinging gently on its thin chain. She tucked it back automatically, the way a person does with something they are used to keeping close and private. But she wasn't quite fast enough. The biker's eyes dropped to it, just for a second. A flash of something crossed his face. Not recognition exactly, more like a tremor, like a word he had forgotten suddenly sitting right there on the tip of his tongue. He stared at the locket and went very still. The afternoon sun had dropped lower in the sky, turning the light a dull amber that made the diner look worse than it probably was. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front entrance and around the side of the building, tied off on a stop sign post at one end and a telephone pole at the other. 2 officers stood at the tape line, arms crossed, turning away the last of the curious neighbors who had lingered through the afternoon hoping for answers. Rosie sat on the back of an open ambulance, a thin paper cup of water in both hands. The bandage on her arm was still clean and white. A female officer named Davis had taken her statement twice already, writing everything down in a small spiral notebook with a pen that kept skipping. "And you didn't see anything before the blast?" Officer Davis asked again. She said it patiently, without accusation. "Nothing." Rosie turned the cup in her hands. 1 second everything was normal. The next second the wall just came apart. Davis nodded and wrote something down. "We'll follow up if we need anything else. You have somewhere to stay tonight?" Rosie looked at the diner. Through the busted front window, she could see an investigator in a white jacket crouching near the back wall with a small flashlight, examining the baseboards. Another one was photographing the booth where she and the biker had been sitting. "I live 2 blocks up," she said. "I'll be fine." Davis handed her a card. "Call that number if you remember anything, even something small." Rosie took the card and folded it once and slipped it into her apron pocket. She still had her apron on. She had not even noticed until now. Across the parking lot, the biker stood near the outer edge of the tape line, away from the cluster of officers and investigators. He had finally let the second paramedic look him over, and the only thing they found was a shallow gash on his right forearm that had been cleaned and wrapped in a bandage similar to Rosie's. He had not asked for anything stronger than a couple of over-the-counter pain pills, which the paramedic had given him from a small kit. He stood with his back to the building, facing the road. His black leather vest was dusty down the back, and one of the smaller patches near the shoulder had a tear in the corner. He had not touched it. He just stood there with his weight on one leg and his hands at his sides, watching the street the way a man watches something he is waiting for. An investigator in a gray jacket approached him. He was older, thick through the chest, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Sir, I have a few follow-up questions when you're ready." "Already talked to your guy twice." "I know. This won't take long." The biker looked at him. Then he looked at the diner. Then he gave a slow nod. The investigator asked about where he had been sitting, what direction he had been facing, whether he had seen anyone outside before the blast. The biker answered each question in short, flat sentences. No extra detail, no hesitation. Just the bare minimum a person gives when they have been questioned before and know exactly how much to give. The investigator thanked him, wrote something down, and walked back toward the building. The biker waited. He watched the investigator go. He watched Davis finish up with Rosie. He watched a second officer walk the outer perimeter of the tape line with a camera. Then he pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and turned slightly away from the scene. He typed a short message and waited. 3 seconds later, the phone buzzed once in his palm. He read the reply, and his jaw tightened. He typed back 4 words. Then he locked the screen, slid the phone back into his pocket, and stood there for a moment, with his eyes closed and his chin down. The explosion had been his. Every bit of it. And now he had to figure out what it had cost him. The evening came in slowly. The amber light faded to a flat gray, and the shop across the street flipped its sign to closed. A few streetlights buzzed to life along the main road. The crowd of neighbors had finally gone home. Only the officers and investigators remained, moving in and out of the diner with their kits and their notebooks and their quiet, focused energy. A large white tent had been set up in the parking lot beside 2 folding tables and a row of plastic chairs. Extension cords ran from a generator near the curb, and 2 bright work lights turned the tent interior a pale yellow. This was where the evening interviews were happening, one at a time, orderly and unhurried. Officer Davis ran the table on the left. A younger officer named Holt ran the one on the right. Between them, they had already worked through 4 witnesses. A retired man who had been eating pie near the window. A couple who had been on their way out when the blast hit. A teenager who had been sitting at the counter waiting on a to-go order. Now Rosie sat across from Officer Davis again. She had changed out of her apron sometime in the last hour and was wearing a plain gray hoodie she kept in her locker. She sat with both hands flat on the table, fingers spread slightly, the way a person sits when they are trying to look calm. Davis set a fresh cup of coffee on the table in front of her. "You don't have to have it," she said. "Just thought you might want something warm." Rosie pulled it closer. "Thanks." Davis opened her notebook to a fresh page. "We're just going to go through the day from the beginning one more time. Sometimes in the quiet things come back." "Okay." They started at the beginning. The morning prep. The first customers, the coffee rush. Rosie walked through it all in a steady voice, giving names where she knew them, describing faces where she did not. Davis wrote it all down without interrupting. They were almost through the full account when Davis paused and set her pen down for a moment. "Rosie, the man who shielded you during the blast, has he ever been in the diner before? Prior to today?" Rosie thought about it. "A couple of times. He always sits in the back booth." "Did he ever speak to you beyond ordering?" "Not really. He said thank you. That was about it." Davis wrote that down and picked her pen back up. "And you had no prior relationship with him? You didn't recognize him from anywhere?" "No." Rosie said it simply, without any hesitation. "I don't know him." Davis nodded. She moved on. They finished the account, and Davis closed her notebook and thanked her. Then she asked one more question, the kind that sounds casual but is not. "Is there anyone we should contact for you? Family? Someone who should know you're okay?" Rosie pulled the coffee cup a little closer and looked at the surface of it. "No," she said. "There's nobody." Davis kept her expression even. "You're sure?" "I aged out of the system 2 years ago." Rosie said it without bitterness, the way a person says something they have said enough times that the sharp edges have worn smooth. "Foster care. I've been on my own since then." Davis gave her a small, careful nod. "Okay, you're free to go whenever you're ready." Rosie stood, thanked her, and walked out of the tent. Across the parking lot, the biker had been leaning against the far side of a parked truck for the last 40 minutes, waiting his turn. He had watched the tent. He had watched the people come and go. He had also been watching Rosie, not in a way anyone would have noticed, just watching the way a man watches something that does not quite add up yet, turning a thought over and over in the back of his mind. He heard pieces of what she said to Davis. The wind was quiet, and the tent had open sides. Foster care. Aged out. Nobody to call. He stood very still. Something cold moved through his chest. The parking lot emptied out one car at a time. The officers finished their notes. The investigators sealed their equipment bags. The generator was switched off, and the work lights blinked out. The white tent came down in pieces, folded, and carried back to the county van. One by one, the vehicles pulled away until the lot held only 3 cars and a long stretch of quiet. Rosie sat on the front step of the diner. The building was roped off with yellow tape, but the step itself sat just outside the line. She had found the edge of it and claimed it. She sat with her elbows on her knees and a cold cup of coffee between both hands, staring at nothing in particular. The gray hoodie she wore was not quite enough for the evening chill, but she had not moved to fix that. She just sat. The streetlights made small pools of yellow light along the road. Moths circled one of them near the hardware store. Down the block, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The diner behind her looked wrong. The front window was boarded up with plywood, already stamped with an orange notice from the county. The door was locked and sealed. The little chalkboard sign that usually listed the daily special still sat on the sidewalk to the left of the step. Someone had moved it out of the investigation zone and leaned it against the brick wall. It still read, Tuesday's special, chicken pot pie and sweet corn. That morning felt very far away. Rosie stared at the chalkboard for a while. She thought about the pot of coffee she had started at 6:30. She thought about the way the morning light came through the east window and made a long rectangle of warmth on the tile floor near the counter. She thought about how she had been thinking about nothing worse than whether they had enough napkins in the dispenser near table 4. Then she stopped thinking about it. She looked down at her hands instead. There was a small cut on her left palm, just below the thumb. She had not noticed it until an hour ago when one of the paramedics pointed it out. It had already closed on its own. It did not hurt unless she pressed on it. She pressed on it once, then stopped. She turned the silver locket over in her fingers. She had done this several times already in the last hour, without fully realizing it. It was a habit she had carried for years. Whenever she felt unsteady, her hand found the locket. It was the one thing she had that connected her to something before. Something before the first foster home, before the caseworker with the tired eyes, and the stuffed manila envelope, before any of it. She did not know who the baby in the photo was. She had asked once, when she was 9. The caseworker at the time had checked her file and come back with nothing useful. The records from her earliest placement were incomplete. There had been a fire at a county office. Paperwork was lost. That was the answer she had been given, and the answer she had carried. She tucked the locket back under her collar and stood up. She was not sure where she was going. She did not have a car. The apartment she rented was 6 blocks north, above the laundromat on Birch Street. She had walked the route enough times that she could do it without thinking. She picked up her bag, left the cold coffee on the step, and started walking. From the far end of the parking lot, behind the dark shape of a parked truck, the biker stood and watched her go. He did not move to follow her. He did not call out. He just stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, watching the gray hoodie under the streetlights until she turned the corner at the end of the block and was gone. Then he stood there a while longer, alone in the dark with a thought he was not ready to say out loud. The police tape was still up at 7 in the morning. Detective Carol Marsh ducked under it with a coffee cup in one hand and a folder tucked under her arm. She had been on the job for 19 years, and she had learned to read a scene before she read a report. She stopped just inside the door and looked around slowly. The diner smelled like burnt wood and old grease. The morning light pushed through the gaps in the plywood boards and made thin yellow lines across the floor. Dust still hung in the air near the back wall. The booth closest to the counter had collapsed on one side, its red vinyl seat split open, the foam inside dark with grime. She walked the room without touching anything. Her shoes crunched on small debris with each step. A coffee mug sat unbroken on the counter, somehow untouched. A rack of pie cases near the register had toppled and shattered. Paper napkins were scattered across the floor, some of them brown at the edges. She crouched near the center of the damage and studied the floor. Marsh had seen bomb scenes before. Real ones. The kind that came from outside sources. They left a signature, a direction, a point of origin that told a story about where the force came from and what it traveled through. This scene was telling her something different. She opened her folder and compared it to the photos from the night before. The damage pattern was wrong for an external device. The blast had not pushed inward from a window or a wall. The force had moved outward from a contained interior point. Low, close to the ground, near the base of the counter, tucked behind the kick panel of the service station. She stood and looked at the space behind the counter for a long moment. The county bomb technician, a quiet man named Gerald Pugh, came through the door behind her at 7:15. He set his bag on the nearest clean surface and snapped on a pair of gloves. "Morning," he said. "Tell me what you found," Marsh said. He pulled out a small evidence bag and held it up. Inside was a fragment of metal casing, no bigger than a bottle cap. It was blackened and warped, but the shape was clear enough. "This was not store-bought," he said. "No commercial signature, no military surplus either. Somebody built this. Somebody who knew what they were doing." "Controlled?" she asked. "Very," he said. "Whoever set this knew exactly how much force they wanted. The damage is loud. It looks bad, but structurally, the building is almost fine. No load-bearing damage, no gas line involvement. No one should have died in this blast." Marsh looked at him steadily. "Someone wanted it to look dangerous without being dangerous." He nodded. "That is what the evidence says." She wrote something in her notes and capped the pen. "No footprints outside. No tire tracks near the alley that do not belong to known vehicles. No witnesses saw anyone enter before opening." She said it almost to herself. Whoever did this had access before the diner opened. Pugh zipped his bag, or was already inside. Marsh stood very still with that for a moment. Then she flipped to the next page of her folder. The page with the names of everyone present that morning. Her eyes moved down the list and stopped near the bottom. One name. No last name on file. No address. No prior contact with local law enforcement. Just a physical description and the word volunteer written next to the box asking for his relationship to the scene. She tapped the page once with her finger and closed the folder. Outside in the parking lot, across the street in a gray sedan with tinted windows, two men sat without speaking. One of them had a camera with a long lens resting across his lap. He raised it slowly and pointed it toward the diner entrance. He held it there. Then he shifted the angle slightly, pointing it down the block toward the corner of Birch Street, where a light was on above the laundromat. He took 3 photos and lowered the camera. The other man wrote something in a small notebook and said nothing. 2 days was not enough time to fix a diner, but Patty Voss, who had owned the place for 11 years, was not the kind of woman who waited for perfect. She had repainted the front wall herself the morning after the blast, standing on a step stool with a roller brush and a gallon of off-white paint, while the police tape was still drying from the dew. She had called her supplier at 6 in the morning to replace the broken display case. She had swept the floor 3 times before the health inspector arrived. The diner opened at 7:15 on a Wednesday, 40 minutes late, with a handwritten sign taped to the glass door. It read, "We are still here. Come on in." The inside still showed the marks of what had happened. The booth nearest the counter had been replaced with a folding table and 2 mismatched chairs. The kick panel below the service station was new wood, pale and unpainted, standing out against the older dark trim like a patch on a worn jacket. The ceiling above the counter had a faint gray stain where the smoke had risen and settled. Patty had tried to paint over it, but the gray was stubborn. She left it. The staff was reduced to 3. Patty herself worked the register and helped in the kitchen when needed. A cook named Hector, who was 60, and had worked there since before Patty bought the place, moved quietly between the grill and the prep counter, never in a hurry, but never still. And the young waitress was back. Her name was Maya. She had come in 20 minutes early, changed into her apron in the back hallway, and filled the napkin holders without being asked. Her hands moved quickly and without waste, the way they always did. She had a small bruise near her left temple from the blast, now yellowing at the edges, and a thin bandage on her forearm that she had tucked beneath her sleeve. Patty had asked her twice if she needed more time off. Maya had said no both times, and that had been the end of it. The morning crowd came in slowly. Some of the regulars arrived looking uncertain, standing just inside the door for a moment before choosing a seat, as if they were not sure yet whether the familiar smell of coffee and eggs was enough to make things feel normal again. Most of them sat down. Most of them ordered the same things they always ordered. By 9 o'clock, 6 of the 8 tables were filled. Maya moved between them steadily. She refilled cups without being flagged down. She remembered that the man by the window took his eggs dry and that the older woman in the corner booth liked extra lemon with her water. She smiled when people asked how she was doing, and the smile was real enough that no one pressed further. But her eyes were tired. She carried it quietly, the way people do when they have practiced carrying things for a long time and do not know any other way. The bell above the door rang at 9:17. He came in without rushing. He wore the same black leather vest, patched and worn, over a dark gray shirt. His boots were heavy on the floor. He was not a small man, and the diner felt slightly smaller when he stepped inside, the way a room does when someone with a particular kind of presence enters it. He looked around once. Not the way a customer looks around for an open seat. The way a man looks around when he is checking something. His eyes moved to the windows first, then the door to the back hallway, then each table in order. He did it quickly and without expression, and most people in the room did not notice. Then he pulled out a stool at the far end of the counter, the one closest to the wall, with a clear view of the whole room, and sat down. Maya came over with the coffee pot. "Back again?" she said. He nodded once and turned his coffee cup upright on the saucer. Maya's shift ended at 2 in the afternoon. She untied her apron in the back hallway, folded it over the hook by the door, and pulled on her jacket. It was a light blue zip-up, a little thin for the October air, with a small tear along the left cuff she had never gotten around to fixing. She slung her bag over one shoulder, said goodbye to Hector through the kitchen window, and pushed out through the back door into the alley. The alley ran between the diner and a hardware store. It smelled like old grease and dry leaves. A dumpster sat against the far wall, rust creeping up its sides. Maya walked through it without thinking, her sneakers quiet on the cracked pavement, and turned left onto Cedar Street. Cedar Street was calm in the early afternoon. A few cars moved slowly past the storefronts. An older man walked a small dog near the barber shop. The post office had its flag up, snapping in a light wind. Maya pulled her jacket tighter and started the 6-block walk home. She did not own a car. She had thought about getting one, a used one, something cheap, but between rent and utilities and the occasional bill that always seemed to show up at the wrong time, it never quite happened. The walk was fine most days. It gave her time to think, or not think, depending on what the shift had been like. She had almost reached the corner of Cedar and Maple when the car appeared. It came from the far end of the block, moving slowly. Too slowly for the road. It was a dark green sedan, older, with a crack running up the lower corner of the windshield, and tinted windows that were just dark enough to make the inside hard to see. It rolled past a parked truck, and then stopped. It did not pull to the curb. It just stopped, mid-street, engine running. Maya noticed it the way you notice something that does not quite fit. Her pace did not change, but her shoulders came up slightly. She shifted her bag to the other side and kept walking. The car stayed where it was. She crossed Maple and kept going. When she reached the middle of the next block, she glanced back once, the kind of glance that tries not to look like a glance. The car had moved again. It was rolling slowly behind her, staying a full block back, matching her pace without closing the distance. Her mouth went dry. She kept her eyes forward and told herself it was nothing. A lost driver. Someone looking for an address. There were reasonable explanations. She tried to hold on to one of them. But the car did not stop. And it did not pass her. And it did not turn. 3 blocks back, on the cross street that ran parallel to Cedar, a motorcycle engine turned over quietly. The man on it did not rev it. He pulled out slow and easy, like someone with nowhere in particular to be. He wore a dark helmet with the visor down and took the back route with the ease of someone who had studied the street layout more than once. He came around the block without appearing on Cedar Street directly. He took a side road that brought him out ahead of the green sedan, cutting across at the intersection of Cedar and Lincoln, and he let the bike idle there for a moment directly in the sedan's path. He did not look at the car. He sat on the bike, both boots on the pavement facing the opposite direction, still, patient, like a man waiting for a friend. But he was big, and the bike was loud even idling, and the patches on the back of his vest were visible from a distance. The green sedan sat at the far end of the block. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the sedan's reverse lights came on. It backed up to the previous intersection, turned, and was gone. Maya kept walking, unaware. The Millfield Public Library closed at 7 on Tuesdays. Maya knew this because she had been coming here on Tuesdays for 3 years. Not always for research. Sometimes just to sit somewhere quiet that was not her apartment. The library had tall ceilings and wooden tables and the smell of old paper, and it never asked anything of her. She liked that about it. Tonight she had a purpose. She sat at a table near the back, away from the front windows, with her bag on the chair beside her and a paper cup of gas station coffee growing cold near her elbow. In front of her was a manila folder, worn soft at the corners from being opened and closed too many times. Inside it were the copies she had requested from the state foster care office 3 years ago, back when she had aged out of the system and was trying to piece together where she came from. Most of what she had received was useless. Forms with blanks, dates with no context, names blacked out with thick marker lines. She had read it all before, many times, but after the explosion, after the man in the leather vest, after the way he had looked at her locket like he had seen a ghost, she felt the pull to look again. She spread the papers out in a neat row. The first page was her intake form. Date of entry into foster care, March 14th. Year redacted. Place of birth, listed as County General Hospital in a town called Denton Ridge. She had looked Denton Ridge up once. It was a small town about 200 miles east, the kind of place with one stoplight and a grain elevator on the edge of town. She moved to the second page. It was a health record. Basic. Weight, height, vaccinations. At the bottom, a handwritten note in faded blue ink said, "Infant transferred, following voluntary relinquishment. No next of kin listed. Father status, unknown." She had read that line so many times it had stopped hurting. Almost. She moved past it and pulled out the third page, which was a placement summary. It listed the names of the 3 foster families she had lived with before she was 12, all of them blacked out per standard privacy policy. What remained were dates, caseworker codes, and transfer reasons. The second transfer reason said, "Safety reassessment required following external party inquiry." She had always wondered what that meant. She turned to the last page in the folder. It was the one that had always bothered her the most. It was a short memo, typed, with a state agency header at the top. It referenced her case file number and stated that her original birth record had been sealed under a protective order filed in Denton Ridge County Court. A protective order. She had assumed it was to protect her from something. A dangerous birth parent, maybe. She had built that story in her mind like a wall and lived behind it. But tonight, she looked at it differently. She pulled out her phone and typed the name of the county court into the search bar. It took a few minutes of clicking through old public records databases she had bookmarked before she found what she was looking for. A list of protective orders filed in Denton Ridge County in the relevant year range. She scrolled slowly. Most were domestic cases. A few were sealed entirely with no identifying information. But near the bottom of the list, one entry stood out. It was listed under a case type she did not recognize at first. Not domestic, not civil. It was filed under criminal protective classification, connected to an organized crime investigation. The filing party was listed only by initials. RD. The protected subject, also by initials, was listed as infant female, unnamed at time of filing. Maya stared at the screen. She went back to her foster file and looked at the transfer memo again. At the bottom right corner, almost hidden in the fold of the paper, was a small handwritten notation she had never paid attention to before. 2 letters, written in a different hand than the rest of the document. RD. The black sedan had been parked on Birch Street since 6 in the morning. It sat half a block down from the Millfield Public Library. Engine off. Windows cracked just enough to keep the glass from fogging. From the outside, it looked like any other car. A little dusty, ordinary color, no markings. Inside, 2 men sat without speaking. The one in the driver's seat was thick through the shoulders, with a shaved head and a jaw like a cinder block. He went by Rack. He had been with the outfit for 11 years and had learned early on that patience was worth more than speed in this kind of work. He held a paper coffee cup in one hand and watched the street the way a man watches water, still and flat and completely focused. The one in the passenger seat was younger, leaner. He had nervous eyes that moved too fast and fingers that wouldn't stop tapping against his knee. His name was Cole, and he was 26 years old and still trying to prove something. He kept glancing at his phone like it might tell him something the street couldn't. "She came out at 9:40, Cole said. "I know," Rack said. "I was here. Just saying. Stop saying." Cole looked back out the window. The waitress had left her apartment building at 9:42 and walked 6 blocks to the diner. No car, no bus. She walked the same route she had walked every morning since they started watching her 4 days ago. Same direction, same pace. She carried a canvas bag over one shoulder and kept her head down when she passed the corner where the hardware store used to be before the fire, 2 winters back. She did not look like someone who knew she was being watched. That was good. Rack lifted a small pair of binoculars and trained them on the far end of the street, where the diner's repaired front entrance was just visible. Workers had boarded up the worst of the blast damage and strung orange construction netting across the left side of the building. A small hand-painted sign in the window said, "Open. Come on in." He watched her disappear through the door. He set the binoculars down and reached for a manila envelope wedged between his seat and the center console. He pulled out 2 photographs and laid them on the dashboard side by side. The first was the biker, shot from a distance, taken outside a motel on Route 9 2 mornings ago. He was standing beside his motorcycle with a coffee cup in one hand, staring out at the road. Even in a grainy photo taken from across a parking lot, there was something about the man that made the air feel heavier. Rack had dealt with men like him before, men who had spent so long inside violence that it became part of how they stood, how they breathed, how they looked at an empty road like they were reading something written there that nobody else could see. The second photo was the girl, Maya, taken yesterday afternoon through a library window. She was bent over a table with papers spread in front of her, her face angled down, dark hair falling forward over one shoulder. Rack looked at both photos for a long moment. Then, he picked up his phone and dialed. It rang twice. "Go ahead," said the voice on the other end. "She's confirmed," Rack said. "Same locket. Same birthmark on the left wrist. We got a clear shot of it when she was rolling up her sleeve outside the diner yesterday." A pause. "And him?" Still watching her from a distance. "He doesn't know we've identified the connection yet." Rack picked up the photo of the biker. "But he will." "Then we move before he does," the voice said. "She's the only thing that man on earth would stop for. You understand what I'm saying?" "Yes, sir." "She's leverage. Start planning the grab." The lunch rush had slowed to almost nothing by 2 in the afternoon. A few regulars sat at the counter, nursing coffee refills. An older man in overalls read a folded newspaper near the window. A mother and her young daughter shared a slice of pie at the corner table, the little girl's feet swinging back and forth without touching the floor. Maya moved between tables with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself useful before anyone could think to make her feel small. She refilled cups without being asked. She wiped down the counter between orders. She smiled at the little girl and told her the cherry pie was the best thing on the menu, which was true, and they both knew it. The construction workers had finished patching the left wall that morning. The diner didn't look perfect, but it looked like itself again, mostly. Warm and a little worn, and smelling like coffee and butter and something faintly sweet from the kitchen. The biker sat in the far corner booth. He had been there since 11:30. He ordered black coffee and a plate of eggs he barely touched. He kept his worn leather vest on despite the warmth inside, and held the coffee cup in both hands like it was the only thing keeping him steady. His eyes moved across the room in slow, careful sweeps. Not obvious, not aggressive, just watchful. The way a man watches when he has learned that danger doesn't always announce itself. Maya noticed him the way she had been noticing him for the past few days. It was hard not to. He was not exactly the kind of man who blended in. The tattoos, the vest with its patches, the way he sat with his back to the wall, and his face to the door like sitting any other way, was simply not something his body knew how to do. She topped off the older man's coffee and made her way toward the corner booth with the pot still in her hand. "You need a warm-up," she asked. He looked up. For just a second, something moved across his face, quick and unguarded, like a door opened and then shut just as fast. "Sure," he said. She poured. He watched the coffee and not her, which she had also noticed. Most people looked at her when she was pouring. It was just a normal thing people did. He looked away, like looking directly at her cost him something. She set the pot down on the edge of the table. "You were in here yesterday, too," she said. "And the day before." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "Coffee's good here." "It's the same coffee as everywhere else in this town." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller than that. "Maybe I like the company." She tilted her head slightly, studied him. Up close like this, she could see the lines around his eyes, deep and permanent, the kind that came from years of squinting into wind and sun, and things harder than either. There was a scar along his jawline, thin and pale, old enough to be a part of him now. His hands were rough and broad, and he held that coffee cup like it was fragile, which she thought was an interesting thing for hands like those to do. "You saved my life," she said. He didn't answer. "The explosion," she continued. "You didn't have to do that. You didn't even know me." "Didn't think about it," he said. Which was true in the way that some true things are also incomplete. Maya pulled out the chair across from him. She didn't ask. She just sat down and looked at him straight, on the way she had learned to look at people when she needed the real answer and not the easy one. "So, why are you still here?" she asked. "Why do you keep coming back?" He opened his mouth, closed it, set the coffee cup down very carefully on the table in front of him, and for one long, unguarded moment, he looked at her like he was about to say something that would change everything. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, he reached for his coffee cup again, slow and deliberate, like the motion gave him somewhere to put all the things he wasn't saying. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said. "After everything." Maya watched him. She didn't look away. She had a way of doing that, holding eye contact just long enough to let a person know she wasn't going to be brushed off easily. It was a skill she had picked up early. Foster homes taught you a lot of things. One of them was how to read a room. Another was how to know when someone wasn't being fully straight with you. She was about to say something more when the kitchen door swung open hard and fast and banged against the wall. Patty came through it like a woman on a mission. Patty Greer owned the diner. She was somewhere in her late 50s, with short, silver hair, and a laugh that could fill a room without trying. She wore a flour-dusted apron over a bright blue shirt, and she was carrying a handwritten sign on a piece of poster board that she had clearly just finished making because the marker was still wet in a few spots. She held it up with both hands. The letters were big and uneven and full of energy. Community fundraiser. This Saturday. Help us rebuild. "All right, listen up," Patty announced to the near-empty dining room, speaking to the handful of customers and the 2 staff members visible near the counter, as though she were addressing a packed house. "Saturday evening. Right here. We're doing a fundraiser dinner to get this place back on its feet properly. Live music, home-cooked food, pie auction, the whole thing. I'm taking volunteer sign-ups starting right now, and I will not be told no." The older man in overalls looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Count me in, Patty." The young mother at the corner table nodded. "We'll be here." Patty beamed. She moved toward the counter with the poster board tucked under one arm and a marker in her hand, and started writing names on the back of it immediately. Maya stood up from the booth. "I can run the welcome table," she said, "and help set up in the morning." "You're already on the list, sweetheart," Patty said without looking up. "You were on the list before I even made the list." Maya smiled. It was a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. She turned back toward the corner booth to clear the biker's plate, and found him watching the whole scene with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. It wasn't the careful, watchful look he usually wore. It was something quieter than that. Something almost wistful, like a man watching something warm from outside in the cold and not quite knowing how he ended up on the wrong side of the glass. Patty turned around and spotted him for the first time. She had known he had been coming in. Maya had mentioned it. Patty was not a woman who missed much. She walked over without hesitation, hand extended. "Patty Greer," she said, "I own the place. You're the man who covered Maya during the blast." He looked at the hand for just a second. Then he shook it. "Ray," he said. "Well, Ray." Patty put one hand on her hip and looked at him with the frank, appraising look of a woman who had been reading people across a diner counter for 30 years. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to help with security Saturday night? We're going to have a good crowd, and I'd feel better having someone with your particular kind of presence near the door." Ray was quiet for a moment. He looked past Patty to where Maya was standing, gathering cups from a nearby table. She glanced back at him briefly. Just a glance, small and ordinary, and completely unaware of how much weight it carried. He looked back at Patty. "Yeah," he said. "I can do that." The morning of the fundraiser arrived soft and cool. The sky was pale blue with thin white clouds stretched across it like pulled cotton. The kind of sky that made everything feel a little more possible than it had the day before. By 9 in the morning, people were already showing up. Not just regulars. Neighbors from 3 streets over. Families from the edge of town. A retired couple who had heard about the diner explosion through a church bulletin and wanted to help. 2 teenage boys who had ridden their bikes over and immediately started unfolding tables without being asked. Patty stood in the center of it all, directing traffic with a coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She pointed people where to go with the confidence of a woman who had been feeding this town for decades and was not about to stop now. Maya arrived early. She wore a simple yellow dress under her diner apron. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely. She carried a box of handmade decorations. She had stayed up until midnight, cutting and folding. Paper stars, little string lights, a banner she had painted by hand that read, "We are still here," in wide, careful letters. One of the other waitresses saw the banner and pressed a hand to her heart. "Maya," she said softly, "that's beautiful." Maya smiled and climbed up on a step stool to hang it across the front window. Ray showed up at 10. He pulled up on his motorcycle and parked it around the side of the building where it wouldn't be in the way. He wore his usual black leather vest over a clean dark shirt. His boots were scuffed but solid. He moved through the growing crowd quietly, scanning faces out of habit, checking sightlines the way a man does when he has spent too many years needing to know all the exits. But today felt different. Today, the diner smelled like pot roast and fresh bread and coffee and pie. Today there were children running between the tables, and an old man tuning a fiddle near the back corner, and a little girl pressing her nose against the pastry case with wide, reverent eyes. Ray stood near the door, like he had agreed to. But he didn't feel like a guard. He felt like something he couldn't quite name. By late afternoon, the place was full. Every seat taken. People standing along the walls. The noise was warm and layered. Voices and laughter and the clink of silverware. And the fiddle player sawing his way through something cheerful that got 2 older women up and dancing near the jukebox. Patty climbed up on a chair near the counter and whistled sharp through her teeth. The room settled. "I want to say something before we get to the pie auction," Patty announced, her voice carrying easily. "This diner has been in my family for 31 years. My mother opened it. I kept it going. And a week ago, something happened in here that shook us all." She paused. "But look around you. Look at this room." People looked, at each other, at the patched walls still showing damage beneath the decorations, at the banner in the window. "I asked Maya if she would say a few words," Patty said, "because she was here that morning. And because if anybody in this room understands what it means to keep showing up anyway, it's her." Quiet applause moved through the room. Maya stepped forward from behind the counter. She unfolded a small piece of paper. Her hands were steady, but Ray could see from where he stood near the door that she was breathing carefully, the way a person does when they are holding themselves together from the inside. She looked up at the room full of people who had come out for her, for this place, for something as simple and enormous as a diner that had fed them and known their names. Her voice, when it came, was clear and warm and just a little rough at the edges. "I grew up not having a place that felt like mine," she said. Ray went very still. The fundraiser wound down slowly, the way good things do. People lingered. They refilled their coffee cups one more time. They hugged Patty by the door and told her they'd be back next week. The fiddle player packed up his case and left a 20 in the tip jar on his way out. The two teenage boys who had shown up that morning to unfold tables were now helping stack chairs without being asked. Maya was wiping down the counter when the last customer left. Ray watched from near the door until the parking lot had mostly emptied. He noted each face, each car, each direction people walked when they left. Old habit. Couldn't help it. When the lights inside dimmed to a warm, low glow, and Patty turned the sign on the door from open to closed, Ray finally stepped outside. The night air was cool and smelled like grass and distant rain. The string lights Maya had hung along the front were still lit, tiny and gold against the dark. The "We are still here" banner pressed gently against the glass from inside. He walked to his bike. He pulled on his jacket, zipped it halfway, and swung a leg over the seat. The engine turned over with a low, steady rumble that felt right after a day that had felt right in ways he hadn't been prepared for. He sat there for a moment, before pulling out. Then he rode. He kept to the back roads out of habit, cutting through the edge of town where the streetlights got sparse and the houses spread further apart. Gravel crunched under his tires. A dog barked somewhere down a dark driveway and went quiet again. He almost missed them. A dark truck, 2 blocks back. No headlights. Ray kept his pace exactly the same. He didn't speed up. He didn't turn his head. He just watched the side mirror the way a man does when he already knows what he is looking at and is working through what to do about it. The truck stayed with him through 2 turns. He took a third turn, a longer loop that added 5 minutes to his route, circling back toward the edge of town where the road opened up. The truck followed. It kept its distance, careful, but it followed. Ray's jaw tightened. He had been watched before, many times. He knew the difference between someone heading the same direction and someone tracking you. This was tracking, steady, patient, professional. He led them on a loop that brought him close to a gas station, with good light, and a security camera mounted on the corner post. He pulled in slowly, filled up without hurrying, let the camera do its job. The dark truck rolled past without stopping, moving at a measured pace that said they weren't done, just adjusting. He watched it disappear around the far corner. He paid inside, nodded at the young man behind the counter, and walked back to his bike. His hands were calm. His mind was not. They weren't following him to find him. They already knew where he was. They had known for days now. They were measuring something else. They were measuring his habits, his schedule. When he left, which route he took, how long he stayed at the diner, how much time Maya spent there alone after hours. He sat on his bike in the white light of the gas station for a long moment. Then, he took out his phone and typed a single, short message to the number he never used unless things were serious. He sent it. He waited. No reply came that night. He rode home with his eyes on every mirror. 2 miles away, in the back of the same dark truck parked behind a shuttered hardware store, 3 men sat in the low blue glow of a phone screen. One of them was broad-shouldered, with a short, flat scar across his chin. He scrolled through a series of photographs taken from a distance. The diner, the parking lot, the banner in the window. Then he stopped on one image. Maya, outside the diner, carrying a box, alone. "She works a double tomorrow," he said. The man beside him nodded once. Then, we move tomorrow. The diner smelled like coffee and warm butter. Maya moved between tables the way she always did, easy and steady, balancing 2 plates on one arm, while her other hand refilled a mug without spilling a drop. The morning crowd was light but cheerful. A few of the same faces from the fundraiser were back, still carrying the good feeling from the day before. Old Gerald sat in his regular spot by the window, reading his paper. 2 women from the church on Maple Street shared a piece of pie they had ordered before noon, which they did every Thursday. It felt almost normal. Ray was at the counter. He had come in early, ordered black coffee, and said very little. He sat with his back toward the wall the way he always did, angled so he could see both the front door and the side window at the same time. His coffee had gone mostly untouched. Maya passed him on her way to the kitchen. "You want a refill?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said. She looked at him for half a second longer than usual. He had been quieter this morning, stiffer somehow, like a man carrying extra weight across his shoulders that no one else could see. She didn't push it. She went back to her tables. The police cruisers pulled into the parking lot at 20 minutes past 9. 2 of them, not rushing, not lights on, just rolling in steady and deliberate. Maya noticed them through the front window as she was topping off Gerald's coffee. She watched as the doors opened and 3 officers stepped out. One of them she recognized, Deputy Harlan, a broad man in his 50s, who came in sometimes on weekday mornings. He wasn't wearing the expression he usually wore when he came in for breakfast. Ray had already seen them. He set his mug down carefully. His hands stayed flat on the counter. Deputy Harlan pushed through the front door first. The bell above it rang the way it always did. The cheerful sound felt wrong against the look on his face. "Ray Decker," Harlan said. The diner went quiet in that way diners do when something serious walks through the door. Old Gerald lowered his paper. The 2 women from the church looked up from their pie. Ray turned on the stool slowly. "Deputy?" "Need you to come with us," Harlan said. He kept his voice even. Professional. "Got some questions about the explosion last week." "I already talked to your people," Ray said. "I know you did." Harlan took 1 step closer. "This is about some new information we received." Ray looked at him steadily. His face gave away nothing. "What kind of information?" Harlan didn't answer that directly. He just gave a small nod toward the door, patient and firm. "Outside, please." Ray stood. He was taller than Harlan by a few inches, and wider through the chest. For just a moment, the room held its breath. Then Ray reached down, picked up his jacket from the stool beside him, and walked toward the door without a word. Maya had stopped moving. She stood near the counter with the coffee pot still in her hand, watching. Outside, through the big front window, she saw one of the younger officers say something to Ray in the parking lot. She saw Ray's expression change, just barely, just a tightening around the eyes. The officer held up a clear evidence bag with something inside. She couldn't make out what it was from where she stood. She watched Ray look at it. She watched him say something back. She watched Harlan reach for the handcuffs. Ray didn't fight. He didn't pull away. He put his hands behind his back like a man who had made a decision, and the cuffs clicked into place in the quiet morning air. Maya pressed her hand flat against the window glass. Ray turned his head as they walked him toward the cruiser. Just once. He looked back through the window directly at her. His eyes said something she didn't have words for yet. Then, they put him in the back of the car and drove away. The holding cell was small. 4 concrete walls. A metal bench bolted to one side. A single light overhead that hummed faintly and never turned off. The kind of place designed to make a man feel the full weight of himself. Ray sat on the bench, with his forearms resting on his knees. His leather vest was gone. They had taken it at processing along with his belt, his wallet, and the small folded photograph he kept in his inside pocket. Without the vest, He felt stripped down to something raw, something he hadn't looked at directly in a long time. He stared at the floor. The concrete was pale gray and cracked in one corner, a thin, dark line running from the wall toward the drain in the center. He followed that line with his eyes the way a man does when his mind is too full to land on any one thing. He thought about the explosion. He had planned it carefully, every detail mapped out. The charge was small, controlled, placed in the back storeroom where the structural damage would be minimal and the noise would be maximum. Enough to scatter the room. Enough to draw out the Iron Cross boys who had been circling for weeks. He had done it because he thought he could manage the outcome. Because he believed, the way he had always believed, that he could control the world around him if he just planned hard enough and moved fast enough. He had been wrong before. He had been wrong the night Maya's mother left. He had been 26 years old and already in deep with the club. He told himself then, too, that he had everything managed, that he could protect her and keep his life the way it was, that the two things could exist side by side without one destroying the other. They couldn't. She had left without telling him she was pregnant. He found out 3 months later through a mutual contact, and by then she had moved, changed her number, and made her intentions clear. He had gone looking, not right away, but eventually, when the worst of that period had burned itself out, and he surfaced long enough to feel something again. What he found was a death certificate with her name on it, and a sealed adoption file that his lawyer couldn't crack, no matter what angle they tried. He had believed the child was gone. For almost 20 years he had believed that. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The girl in that diner. Her dark hair, and the way she tilted her chin up when she was uncertain about something. The locket. The birthmark he had glimpsed near her collarbone that matched a detail in a hospital photograph he had held so many times, the edges had gone soft. The way she moved through a hard room like she had learned early, that the floor might shift under her at any moment. He had spent his whole life being the reason floors shifted. The light above him hummed. He dropped his hands and sat up straight, pressing his back against the cold wall. Outside the cell he could hear the low sounds of the station. A phone ringing, footsteps, someone laughing at something down the hall. He thought about the evidence bag Harlan's officer had held up outside the diner. A burner phone, one he had never seen before, with messages on it that made him look like the sole architect of a domestic terror event. Clean, convincing, and completely manufactured. The Iron Cross boys had been busy. The door at the end of the corridor opened with a heavy clank. Footsteps came down the hall. Slow ones, slightly uneven, like a man carrying an old injury in one knee. Ray looked up. The man who stopped in front of his cell was older, maybe 60, plain clothes, no badge visible, gray at the temples, with the kind of steady eyes that came from spending decades watching people and learning when they were lying. He looked at Ray for a moment without speaking. Then he pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket. "My name is Del Vecchio," he said quietly. "And I think you've been set up. I also think there's something about that girl you don't fully know yet." He held up the envelope. "You want to hear what I found?" Ray had been sitting in the same position for 3 hours when 2 guards came for him. No explanation. Just the click of the cell lock and a hand gesture that meant get up and come with us. He rose slowly, not because his body was slow, but because he refused to look like a man who could be hurried. One of the guards put a hand on his shoulder to steer him, and Ray moved with it without flinching. They walked him down a long corridor and through a heavy door that opened into a different part of the building. The air here was cooler. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. There were doors on both sides, all of them closed, and the sound of their footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor. They stopped outside a room near the end of the hall. One guard opened the door. The other stood back. Ray walked in. It was a small room. A table, 2 chairs, a mirror along one wall that was not trying to hide what it was. A camera mounted in the corner with a small red light that told him someone was already watching. Del Vecchio was there, seated on the far side of the table, with a manila folder open in front of him and a paper cup of coffee he hadn't touched yet. Ray sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ray looked at the folder without looking like he was looking at it. Del Vecchio let the silence sit there, the way experienced men do, comfortable with it, using it. Then he slid a photograph across the table. Ray looked down. It was a surveillance still, grainy but clear enough. Two men standing beside a dark sedan on a residential street. One of them Ray recognized immediately. Cal Briggs. Iron Cross, high-ranking. Mean in a quiet way that made him more dangerous than the loud ones. The second man was younger, someone Ray didn't know. "Taken this morning," Del Vecchio said, 3 blocks from the diner. Ray kept his expression flat. "What time?" 7:42. The diner opened at 8. The girl, whose name he now knew was Maya, started her shift at 7:30. She would have been walking in right around then. He pushed the photo back slowly. "You said last night you thought I'd been set up." "I did." "Then you already know who planted the evidence." Del Vecchio nodded once. "We have a theory. What we don't have is a case. Not yet." He took a breath and leaned forward slightly. "What I need is someone who knows how the Iron Cross operates from the inside. Communication patterns, safe houses, how they move when they're planning something against a specific target." Ray looked at him directly. "You want me to hand them over?" "I want you to help us dismantle them before someone gets killed." The words sat between them clean and simple. Ray had heard a lot of deals in his life. Most of them were layered with angles and escape clauses and things that meant something different 6 months later than they did in the room. This one felt different. Not because Del Vecchio was softer than the others, but because the man wasn't pretending this was easy, or simple, or without cost. Ray leaned back in his chair. "The girl." "Maya Shea," Del Vecchio said. 22, former foster child. No living relatives on record. He paused. "She didn't come into work this morning." The temperature in the room didn't change, but something in Ray's chest did. A tight, pulling sensation he hadn't felt since the night he had held that old hospital photograph, and understood for the first time what it meant to lose something before you even had the chance to hold it. "She's already gone," Ray said. It wasn't a question. Del Vecchio held his gaze. "We believe so." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he looked down at the table, and at nothing in particular, and at everything at once. "Tell me what you need," he said, "and you get me in that room when you find her." Del Vecchio reached for his coffee. "Deal." The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Ray sat at the far end of a folding table surrounded by people who would not have shared a room with him under any other circumstances. 2 plainclothes detectives. A federal contact Del Vecchio introduced only as Marsh. A woman in a gray blazer who took notes on a yellow legal pad without looking up. And Del Vecchio himself, standing at the front of the room beside a corkboard covered in photographs, printed maps, and handwritten names connected by colored string. Ray had seen boards like this before. He had been on them before. Seeing his own history pinned up in pieces on someone else's wall was a strange feeling. Not shame exactly. Something quieter and heavier than that. "Let's get started," Del Vecchio said. He pointed to a photograph near the top of the board. Cal Briggs again. Older than Ray remembered, heavier in the face, but the same flat eyes. Briggs took over the Iron Cross Northern chapter 14 months ago after Petrov was convicted. Since then, we have tracked at least 4 incidents of targeted intimidation, 2 arson cases, and 1 disappearance connected to the chapter. Del Vecchio looked at Ray. "You know his operational style better than anyone in this room." Ray crossed his arms. "Briggs doesn't move fast. He waits, watches. Lets a target settle into thinking they're safe before he does anything. If he has the girl, she's not in immediate danger yet." Marsh spoke up from across the table. His voice was dry and clipped. How confident are you in that? Confident enough, Ray said. Hurting her right away gives him nothing. She's leverage. He needs me to know she's alive before he starts making demands. So he'll make contact, one of the detectives said. He already has. Ray reached into the inside pocket of the jacket they had given him in place of his vest and pulled out his phone. He set it on the table and slid it toward Delvecchio. Came in at noon. Blocked number. No voice message. Just coordinates. The room shifted. Chairs adjusted. The woman in the gray blazer finally looked up. Delvecchio picked up the phone and looked at the screen. He passed it to Marsh without a word. Marsh pulled out his own device and typed something. You didn't respond? No. Good. Marsh kept typing. Give me a few minutes. The room went quiet, except for the hum of the ventilation system in the ceiling and the occasional scratch of the woman's pen. Ray looked at the corkboard. He found Maya's name near the bottom right corner, written in blue marker and circled once. Below it was a printed copy of her foster records and a photograph that looked like it had been taken from the diner's social media page. She was smiling in the photo, standing behind the counter with a coffee pot in her hand and her hair pulled back. Someone had caught her mid-laugh, head tilted slightly, eyes bright. Ray looked away. Got it, Marsh said. He turned his laptop so the room could see it. A satellite map filled the screen. He pinched it outward with 2 fingers, zooming in on a specific point marked with a red pin. Coordinates place us here. He tapped the screen. Old Kellerman fabrication plant. Industrial site off Route 9, about 11 miles east of town. Shut down in 2019. No active permits, no registered occupants. He zoomed in further. The image showed a cluster of long, flat-roofed buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence, cracked asphalt lots, and overgrown weeds pushing through concrete. We've had 2 prior reports of activity out there, one of the detectives said, leaning forward. Both times we checked it out and found nothing. But that was 8 months ago. Delvecchio stared at the map for a long moment. Then he looked at Ray. Ray looked at the screen, at the fenced perimeter, at the long shadows cast by the buildings in the satellite image. That's the place, he said. The sun was going down by the time they spread the printed floor plans across the table. Someone had pulled old building permits from the county records office. The Kellerman fabrication plant had 3 main structures. A long assembly building that ran east to west, a smaller storage unit attached to its south side, and a squat office block near the front gate that faced the road. The prints were faded, and some of the measurements were smudged, but they were enough to work with. Marsh stood at the head of the table again. He had traded his laptop for a red marker and was drawing entry points on the largest print. Primary approach from the west access road, he said, circling a gap in the fence line. Secondary team comes in from the south. We keep the front gate visible but unstaffed. We don't want them bolting. The 2 detectives nodded. One of them, a heavy-set man named Corbin, was writing notes in a small spiral notebook. The other, younger, leaner, kept his eyes on the floor plan without blinking. Ray sat at the side of the table with his arms resting flat on the surface. He listened. He studied the layout. He tracked every word Marsh said and measured it against what he knew about the way Briggs operated. Briggs would expect force. He had spent his whole career anticipating it, preparing for it, sometimes provoking it just to see how the other side moved. A straight entry through the west access road would give Briggs exactly the picture he wanted. His people would have time to shift positions, time to use Maya. Ray let the planning go on for a few more minutes. He waited until Marsh capped his marker before he spoke. That approach doesn't work, he said. Marsh looked at him. Not hostile, not dismissive, just waiting. Briggs will have eyes on the west road, Ray said. He stood up and leaned over the floor plan, pointing to the assembly building. He always puts his lookouts where the light hits first. At dusk, west-facing eyes catch headlights from half a mile out. By the time your primary team reaches the fence, he'll know you're coming. Corbin tapped his pen against the table. So, what do you suggest? Ray traced a path along the bottom edge of the print. There's a drainage easement that runs behind the property. It's not on this permit drawing because it was added after the original build. But it's there. I've been to this site before. He paused. Years ago. Different reasons. Nobody asked what those reasons were. The easement puts you within 30 feet of the storage unit without crossing open ground. If she's anywhere in that complex, she's in there. Not the assembly floor. Too big. Too hard to control one person. The storage unit is smaller, easier to lock down, easier to monitor. Marsh uncapped his marker again and looked at the print. You're saying the secondary team takes the easement approach. I'm saying the secondary team should be the first team that matters, Ray said. Get her out before anything else happens. Before Briggs realizes the perimeter is compromised. Before anyone fires a single shot. The younger detective finally looked up. And if she's not in the storage unit? Then we adjust, Ray said. But you start there. Del Vecchio had been standing quietly near the wall with his hands in his coat pockets. He spoke now. Ray's read on Briggs has been accurate so far. His instincts on the site layout are worth factoring in. Marsh looked at Ray for a long moment. Then at the floor plan. Then he drew a new line along the southern edge of the property, marking the easement route with small arrows. Ray watched him work. His jaw was tight. His hands were still. He didn't care about the arrest record. He didn't care about the charges being walked back, or the deal on the table, or what happened to him when all of this was over. He just needed her to be safe when those doors opened. That was the only thing that mattered now. The sky had gone the color of ash by the time the convoy left the staging area. 3 unmarked vehicles moved in a single line down the county road. No sirens, no flashing lights, just engines and the soft crunch of gravel beneath heavy tires. The headlights were dimmed low, barely cutting through the dark ahead. Ray sat in the back seat of the middle vehicle. His wrists were still cuffed in front of him. A deputy sat to his left with both hands folded in his lap, watching the road ahead like he was waiting for something to happen. Nobody spoke. The fields on either side of the road were flat and black. Occasionally a farmhouse light would flicker in the distance, a warm yellow square floating out in the dark, but mostly there was nothing. Just the road and the night, and the low rumble of the engine. Ray kept his eyes forward. He was counting landmarks in his head. A bent mailbox, a leaning utility pole, a gap in the tree line where the fence had rotted away years ago. He had driven this road before, a long time back, and it hadn't changed much. Places like this never changed much. That was the thing about small county roads. They held still while everything else fell apart. The convoy slowed as it turned onto a dirt access path that wasn't marked on any public map. The vehicles moved single file, tires pressing through shallow ruts in the ground. Tree branches scraped the roof of the car. The headlights clicked off entirely. Marsh's voice came through a radio clipped to the dashboard, low and steady. Team 1, hold at the tree line. Team 2, move to the easement. Radio silence until contact is confirmed. A quiet double click came back through the radio. Then nothing. Ray shifted slightly in his seat. Through the windshield, he could just make out the silhouette of the Kellerman plant in the distance. The old fabrication building was a long, dark shape against the sky. No lights in the assembly windows. But near the back, near the storage unit, there was a faint orange glow, low and steady, like a lamp behind a covered window. Someone was in there. His chest tightened. He breathed through it. The vehicle stopped at the edge of the clearing, about 200 yards from the fence line. The driver cut the engine. Everything went quiet. Somewhere out in the dark, a bird called once, and then went silent too. Marsh stepped out of the lead vehicle and walked back toward Ray's door. He opened it and stood there for a moment, looking at Ray with an expression that was hard to read. Not soft, not hard, just careful. "We move in 4 minutes," Marsh said. "You walk with me. You stay behind the entry team at all times. You do not engage. You do not approach until I give the word." He paused. "Those terms still holding for you?" "They're holding," Ray said. Marsh nodded once. He reached into his coat and produced a small key. He leaned in and uncuffed Ray's wrists. Ray brought his hands forward slowly, rubbing his left wrist with his thumb. The skin was red, but he didn't look at it. He stepped out of the vehicle. The night air hit him, cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of rust and old motor oil from somewhere nearby. The kind of smell that clings to industrial sites for decades after the work stops. Marsh handed him a plain, dark jacket. No insignia, no markings. Ray pulled it on. Around them, the tactical team was moving into position. Quiet, practiced, efficient. They communicated in hand signals and small nods. Nobody ran. Nobody rushed. Everything moved with a kind of deliberate calm that Ray recognized. The calm that comes just before something breaks open. He stood at the edge of the tree line and looked toward that faint orange glow near the back of the property. Marsh stepped up beside him. "We go on my signal," he said quietly. Ray gave a single nod. He was ready. The entry team moved first. They crossed the clearing in a low crouch, staying close to the fence line where the shadows were deepest. Marsh was just behind them. Radio pressed close to his chest. Ray was 2 steps behind Marsh, walking steady, keeping his breathing even. The gravel under his boots was loose. He stepped carefully, 1 foot, then the other, eyes forward. The orange glow near the back of the building was coming from a single window. It was covered with something dark from the inside, cardboard or a blanket, but thin enough that the light bled through the edges in a warm, faint strip. The entry team reached the side door of the storage unit. 2 agents flanked it. 1 held up a fist. Everyone stopped. Silence. Then a single nod. The door came open hard and fast. The team poured through. Ray heard voices inside, loud at first, commands being shouted, then the sounds of a scuffle. Something heavy knocked against a metal shelf. A crash. Then more shouting, sharp and controlled. Marsh moved through the door. Ray followed. Inside, the air was thick. It smelled like motor oil and damp concrete, and something else underneath it all. Something stale and closed in, like a room that hadn't been opened in days. A single work lamp sat on the floor in the far corner, its yellow light throwing long shadows up the walls. Old machinery lined the sides of the room. Shelves of rusted parts, a broken pallet in the corner. 2 men were already on the ground, face down, agents kneeling over them with zip ties. A 3rd man had backed himself against the far wall, hands up, eyes wide. Ray barely looked at any of them. His eyes went straight to the center of the room. She was there. Lily was seated on a wooden chair near the work lamp. Her wrists were bound behind her with a length of rope. Her ankles were tied to the chair legs. There was a strip of dark cloth around her mouth, and her hair was loose and messy, falling over one side of her face. But her eyes were open. She was awake. She was looking around the room at the sudden rush of people and noise and movement with wide, frightened eyes. Her chest was rising and falling fast. She was scared. She was shaking. But she was alive. Ray's throat locked up for just a second. Then he moved. "Ray, hold!" Marsh's voice came from behind him. Ray didn't stop. He crossed the room in long, steady strides, stepping past an overturned crate, moving around the edge of the light. An agent to his left started to raise a hand to slow him, but Marsh said something low and quick, and the agent stepped back. Ray reached her. He dropped to one knee in front of the chair and brought his hands up slowly, keeping them visible, making himself as small and unthreatening as he possibly could. He wanted her to see his face before anything else. He wanted her to understand she was not alone. Her eyes found his. She made a small sound behind the cloth. Not a scream. Something closer to relief, breaking through fear. "It's okay," Ray said, his voice rough but quiet. "I've got you." He reached behind her head and carefully removed the cloth from her mouth. Then he started working on the rope at her wrists, his thick fingers moving as gently as he knew how. From behind him, back near the entrance, something changed. A shout. Then, another voice, different from the agent's, sharp and dangerous, coming from somewhere deeper in the building beyond a second door Ray hadn't seen yet. The third man against the wall suddenly lunged sideways. Wood splintered. That second door blew open hard. More men poured in from the back, fast and desperate and loud. Ray stood up. He turned around. He planted himself directly in front of Lily's chair, both arms spread wide, putting every inch of himself between her and what was coming through that door. The men who came through that back door didn't make it far. 2 agents moved on them fast and clean. There was shouting. A short struggle near the far wall. The clatter of something metal hitting the concrete floor. Then zip ties. Then stillness. It was over in less than a minute. Ray stayed where he was, both arms still out, back to Lily. He didn't move until Marsh walked up beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. "It's done," Marsh said quietly. "We've got them." Ray lowered his arms slowly. He turned back around. Lily hadn't moved from the chair. The rope was still loose around her wrists where he'd been working at it. Her ankles were still tied. She was watching him with those wide, dark eyes, chest still rising and falling too fast, hands trembling against each other behind her back. He knelt down again and finished the job. The knot at her wrists gave first, then the ones at her ankles. He peeled the rope away carefully, like it might hurt her to pull too fast, and set it on the floor beside the chair. She brought her hands to her front and rubbed her wrists. The skin there was red. Not broken, but raw. Ray looked at it, and something pulled tight in the center of his chest. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded. But when she tried, her legs weren't ready. Her knees buckled and she grabbed for the edge of the chair. Ray caught her. His hands went to her arms, and he held her steady, not pulling, not pushing, just there, just solid. A wall she could lean into if she needed to. She did need to. She leaned into his chest, and her breath came out ragged and broken, and she gripped the front of his worn leather vest like she was holding on to the only fixed thing in the room. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around her, careful and steady, and let her shake. Around them, agents moved through the building. Flashlights swept corners. Someone called a code into a radio. Footsteps crossed back and forth over the concrete. The work lamp on the floor kept throwing that yellow light up the walls. None of it touched them, right then. Lily pulled back after a while, just far enough to look at him. Her face was streaked with dust, and her eyes were red at the edges, but she wasn't crying anymore. She was studying him the way she'd started doing weeks ago, that careful, searching look, like she was always trying to read something just beneath the surface. "You came," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "Yeah," Ray said. It was all he had. She shook her head a little, not in disbelief, in something harder to name. "They kept asking me about you. Those men. They wanted to know if I knew you, how I knew you." She swallowed. "I kept telling them I didn't. Not really." Ray stayed quiet. "But that wasn't true," she said. The room was loud around them. Radio chatter, agents calling out clearances. Marsh was somewhere behind him giving instructions to someone. Lily looked down at her wrists, then back up at him. Her jaw worked for a moment, like she was working up to something difficult. "I found the hospital file," she said softly. "The one from the library records. I found your name." Ray's throat closed. She reached up with one shaking hand and touched the silver locket at her neck, the one she always wore. Her fingers pressed it gently against her collarbone. "I've been thinking about it for days," she said. About what to say. About whether any of it could even be real. Ray didn't move, didn't breathe. Her eyes filled up again. She blinked hard. Is it real? She whispered. Yeah, he said. His voice came out broken at the edges. It's real. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face shifted, soft and painful and wide open all at once. Dad, she said. Just that one word. Ray closed his eyes. The fluorescent lights in the recovery hallway were too bright. Ray sat on the edge of a cot in a small exam room, elbows on his knees, staring at the white tile floor. A nurse had cleaned the cuts on his forearms. Someone had handed him a cup of coffee at some point. It had gone cold. Through the thin wall, he could hear voices. Agents giving instructions, a phone ringing, the steady beep of a monitor somewhere down the hall. He hadn't slept. He didn't think Lily had either. They had kept them separated through the night for questioning. Standard procedure, Marsh had told him. Just routine. But the hours had still felt long and hollow. Sitting in that bright room answering questions, signing papers, recounting every detail of every choice going back further than he wanted to remember. He told them all of it. Every name, every location, every operation he had knowledge of. He laid it out flat on the table like cards. Nothing held back. Nothing softened. It took hours. His voice went dry around the second hour, and someone brought him water, and he kept going. When it was done, he felt scraped out, empty in a way that wasn't entirely bad. Marsh appeared in the doorway of the exam room just after 7 in the morning. He was holding a folded document, and he looked like a man who had also not slept. How are you doing? Marsh asked. Ray looked up. I'm all right. Marsh stepped in and pulled a plastic chair over, sitting across from him. He set the folded document on his knee, but didn't open it yet. The DA reviewed everything this morning, Marsh said. Your cooperation, your testimony, what happened last night. He paused. And what you did at the diner, throwing yourself on that girl. Ray didn't say anything. It matters, Marsh said. All of it matters. He held out the document. Ray took it. He unfolded it slowly, eyes moving across the lines. Legal language, formal and dense, but the shape of it was clear enough. Reduced sentencing, supervised rehabilitation program, conditions attached, time to be served, but less of it, and structured around purpose rather than just punishment. His hands weren't steady. He folded it again and held it. Courthouse is at 2, Marsh said. The courtroom was small and quiet. Ray stood when they told him to stand. He listened to the judge read the terms. He answered when spoken to. His voice stayed level, even when his chest didn't feel level at all. Lily was there, seated in the row just behind him. He hadn't looked back at her since he walked in. He didn't trust himself to, and still keep his voice straight. When the gavel came down, the sound of it was clean and final. Outside the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun was low and golden. Ray stood on the bottom step, while Marsh spoke quietly, with 2 other officers nearby. The air smelled like dry leaves and something faintly sweet, maybe from a food cart a block over. Lily came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything right away. Neither did he. They just stood there in the slanted light, shoulder to shoulder, watching pigeons pick at something on the sidewalk across the street. Ready? She asked after a while. He looked at her. She had a jacket on now. Someone had found her a clean one. Her hair was pulled back and her face was still tired, but her eyes were clear. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee, one of which she held out toward him. He took it. Where are we going? He asked. The diner, she said simply. They drove over together in the back of Marsh's vehicle, quiet the whole way. When they got there, the parking lot was mostly empty. The repair work on the front wall was still halfway done, boards and fresh plaster, side by side with the old painted brick. A couple of sawhorses sat by the door. Lily sat on the front step. Ray settled beside her. The sun was going down behind the old water tower at the end of the block, painting the sky in shades of orange and soft pink. The evening was still and warm and unhurried. Ray wrapped both hands around the paper cup and felt the warmth of it spread into his palms. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. They just sat there together, the two of them, watching the light change. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.